Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go over one sample question right here. So go ahead, take a moment and read it. Does anyone have an answer? Which one? A, exactly, at the same time. Okay. So it's going to be answer choice A because the actor's eating regularly and the farmer's being able to enjoy the show. They're happening at the same time and they're both two effects from the same cause. So using a transition that means now kind of makes the most sense to join those two ideas. B is going to be incorrect because in spite of this, it's kind of a contrasting transition, and the actor's eating regularly and the farmer is seeing the show. Those ideas are not contradicting or contrasting each other, so that doesn't make sense. C is going to be incorrect because the farmer's enjoying a show is not an example of how actors eat, and for instance suggests like an example relationship there. Incorrect. And D is going to be incorrect because that shows emphasis, and the farmer seeing a show is not emphasizing the idea that the actors could eat regularly at the same time. Okay. Any questions on that one? It's a little bit tricky. Okay, awesome. So go ahead and do ACT questions 1 through 8 on page 28. Just like the one-word transitions, try to get through all of them if possible, because these are really important.
Okay, the last type of transitions that we're going to talk about today are entire sentences or phrases acting as transitions. And what you want to remember here is that what they're going to be doing is summarizing what comes before them and anticipating what comes after. So you're going to have to pay attention to what's underlined in the test because that could have an effect on what you're looking for. But Jenna's going to give you some more examples of this and you'll see that how it works with this.
So this is a really helpful graphic. So our transition sentence or phrase is serving as a literal link that has to summarize what comes before and anticipate what comes after. I like to think about this as it kind of has to tie them together or just mention both things. Mention what comes before, mention what comes after. For example, we have Patrick, it's kind of hard to see. Patrick Academy can be an extremely exhausting process. While you will be tired, there are many benefits. Many students see a huge increase in their score. So our transition, which is highlighted in green, is while you will be tired, there are many benefits. That first part, while you will be tired, clearly summarizes the point of this sentence, saying that it can be an exhausting process. While the second part of our transition, there are many benefits, previews what comes next, which is one of the benefits. Many students see a huge increase in scores. So that transition is an effective link between those two ideas because it references or mentions both. Okay, any questions on that? Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do this sample question. So go ahead, take a moment and read it. For context, woad is the name of like a weed or a small plant.
Yes, it is deep. So the first example that we saw, it was kind of like really clear in our transition, like kind of obvious, the reviewing and previewing. This is taken from a test. This is more of the speed you're going to see. But as you can see with D, the pointing her nose directly at the woad, that's finishing off the action from the first part of the sentence that it talks about, but it also mentions that woad, like Jenna said, which is the plant, which is what the entire next sentence about. So this acts as the perfect link, which we needed to, unlike the other ones, which, like for example, gets ready for what's next, doesn't really add anything to the sentence in terms of transition because there's not much information there, but D does do exactly what it needs.
Okay, so go ahead and do ACT questions 1 through 7 on page 33. These can be a little bit tricky because taken out of context, it can be hard to kind of know what the question's talking about. So if you do have questions, please ask us. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our last topic of the day, which is redundancy. So redundancy basically just means don't repeat things. On the ACT, you never want to repeat anything if possible. So a couple of tips to help you answer a redundancy question are, first of all, circle words or phrases either physically with your pencil or mentally within the sentence that mean the same thing or repeat the same idea. Eliminate unnecessary adjectives and or adverbs that repeat the meaning of the noun or verb that they modify. And make sure that the sentence is grammatically and logically correct. So basically, the gist of redundancy is don't repeat things, eliminate any repetitive information, but also make sure that when you do so, your sentence is still grammatically correct after it's gone.
So this is an example of a redundant sentence. We have usually restaurants will give out free gifts that cost no money if you come a certain amount of times per month. So if we look here, when we're saying free, gift, and cost no money, we're saying the exact same thing 3 times and we don't need to do that. The ACT does not want you to do that. So we could just say, usually restaurants will give out gifts that cost no money, free things, anything like that. Just don't repeat yourself whenever you can. We also have this list of a lot of words that people don't always think are redundant but are. Like, I never really took the time to think like, oh, each and every, we're kind of saying the same thing twice, but that is one example. Free gift, like we saw, if and when, advance warning, actual fact, 9 a.m. in the morning, unexpected surprise, and past history all repeat each other, and you should not use any of these if they ever come on the test.
We're going to skip the exercises for this topic, but if you do have time later and or you want to come back later to them, feel free to do so. So there are 3 positions of redundancy that are possible. The first one is the easiest one, the most obvious, right next to each other. So for example, we have he was a first place gold medalist. First place and gold medalist mean the same thing. Redundant, so we need to take out one of them. Secondly, in 2 consecutive sentences. For example, we have water skiing was his passion. Jason, a water skier, went on to compete in multiple championships. So we already know that Jason's a water skier based on that first sentence, water skiing was his passion. So we don't need this phrase right here in the next sentence, Jason, a water skier. So this is really important on the ACT because you might only be looking at this sentence if this is the only thing that's underlined. So this is a really important example of when you need to be sure to read the whole passage and focus not only on the sentence with the thing that's underlined, but also the sentence before and the sentence after, just to make sure you don't miss any redundant information. And thirdly, in 2 paragraphs, so this one is the hardest one to recognize. We have a long example here, but I'll go ahead and read it. It says, Bud Lane says to his young granddaughter, he's using a phrase from the language of his ancestors, words so old that they were spoken thousands of years before Europeans arrived in North America. So in the actual passage, this is an excerpt from the first paragraph of the passage. And this one's from the third. So it says, his goal is to teach her coastal Athabascan, a nearly extinct language spoken fluently by only a few members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, given that it is the language of their ancestors. So actually, we already know that it is the language of their ancestors from this phrase in the very first paragraph of the passage, from the language of his ancestors. So this technically would be redundant information. So not only is it important to focus on the sentences before and after the underlined portion, but it's also important to remember to read the whole passage and kind of think about what information you already have. Any questions on these? Awesome. Okay. Oh yeah, we're going to skip this one. Go ahead and read this example question.
Correct. So the cool thing about redundancy questions is that once you do a lot, and hopefully doing that in this topic will be C2, is that they're really easy to start to pull out on a test. And it's really easy to start being like, oh, I know that this is redundant. One of the clues of that is your answer choices. You see how they're obviously not always going to be in order from longest to shortest, but that kind of like idea of the staircase going down. They've got every answer getting a little bit shorter and repeating less and less information. They're all kind of similar. That's a hint that you're looking at a redundancy question. And once you get them, they're super easy to like know what you're doing. But yes, D is correct in this one because we already have in the world at the end, and so we wouldn't need to say world's largest globally, or repeat that largest stellar spectrum, which comes right after. So that's why D is correct. Any questions on that?
Okay, awesome. Go ahead and do ACT questions 1 through 9 on page 39.